Hello, Dog Nation. I bring you tidings of great joy. This is Brandon Adams, and this is a Kroger signing day special. We're actually after signing day, but we're still in the early signing period. We thought we might be hopping on today to talk about a UGA commit, and we get to, soon-to-be signee, and we'll get to that. But there is also news involving Georgia in the transfer portal today there as well. So we have double the good news here as a part of this Kroger signing day special. So over the course of the next few minutes, we are going to look forward to getting into all of that with you as Georgia adds Jordan Hall, top defensive lineman out of the Jacksonville area, top 80 player in the country according to the 24/7 Sports composite, one of those guys that fits in in fact, I'll give you the specific numbers here. He is number 73 nationally according to the 24/7 Sports composite, number 9 defensive lineman in the entire US of A, and the number 16 player in Florida. So the Gators can't sign top 20 players out of the Sunshine State, but Georgia's going to have an entire haul of them, no pun intended, before this 2023 class is over with. So there is a lot to like about Jordan Hall, and if you're going to add the best linebacker crop in the country, and Georgia has certainly worked on doing that at both the inside and outside linebacker positions. If you're going to do that, you better have some defensive linemen in front of them to occupy blocks and be kind of the tip of the spear for that defensive attack. And let me tell you right now, that is exactly what Jordan Hall has the opportunity to do. Jeff Sintel has written some great stuff about Jordan Hall at DogNation.com. We're looking forward to hearing from Jeff Sintel as a part of this Kroger signing day special here coming up in just a little bit. Also, we have a Connor Riley standing by to join us too. Let me say one more thing, though, as far as our headlines go, and then we'll bring Connor on here. So we're going to just kind of do the whole gamut here. So Jordan Hall has committed to Georgia. This happening just a moment ago. We are thrilled by that. Also, moments ago, we get a sense this might be coming soon, although it came probably a little sooner than I expected it to. Ra Thomas, wide receiver, most recently of Mississippi State, the Bulldogs' leading receiver this past season. He has also joined the fold here for UGA. Very nice-looking social media edit there. A lot to like about Thomas, who has already shown his ability to put up numbers in the SEC. So this is double the good news here for Georgia. Hall in as a part of the 2023 class. Ra Thomas, the first dip into the transfer portal for the Bulldogs in now more than a year. So exciting news on a couple of fronts, so let's cover it from all standpoints here right now and welcome in Connor Riley, who obviously watches all of this very closely. Connor, let's be a player's choice here. Where do you want to start? You want to start with Jordan Hall? You want to start with Ra Thomas?
Have you seen how he revealed his actual commitment? But look, there are going to be a lot of comparisons from Jordan Hall to Jalen Carter. I actually think as we finish out this recruiting evaluation process, Jordan Hall's recruiting ranking is really going to climb, and I think potentially he could get in the 5-star status there, similar to the way Jalen Carter did, a defensive lineman out of Florida who just completely ignores Florida or sidesteps them. And I don't know if you've seen how he actually made his commitment.
I haven't.
But he put on the big hat.
Nice.
He put on a big hat. And I could not have been happier by it. And look, he's going to draw comparisons there naturally with Carter being a great defensive lineman out of the state of Florida. Similar body types there, similar, I think, play styles as well. And, before we'd kind of had the understanding that this was going to happen today. And I didn't want to put too much pressure on Mr. Hall, comparing him to Jalen Carter, who best player on this current team and is going to be a top 5 draft pick. But after seeing him put on that big hat, it's hard not to get excited about what he's potentially going to bring to this university, to this team, because in looking at this Georgia recruiting class, the one thing you could say they were probably missing was another defensive lineman, and they have it now. And so, that's just the only thing better is getting a big hat yourself. And as you see Jordan Hall there on your screen with the big hat, you just can't get any better than that.
Here's the problem. My head is already so big that, and I don't mean like from the inflated ego standpoint, I mean like the literal head being so big standpoint, that the big hat on me would probably just look like sort of a normal hat. But either way, I do like seeing the idea of Jordan Hall in the big hat there. So that's good stuff. And Connor, a lot of our audience will remember it was Jalen Carter celebrating the SEC championship by donning the big hat back to begin the month there in Atlanta. So it all kind of comes full circle here. Big hat on Jordan Hall, big hat on Jalen Carter. But your point about Hall is a good one. And I sort of said this morning on Dog Nation Daily as relates to Damon Wilson, which is that we're a little bit desensitized to so-and-so's the top 55, whatever, the top 73, whatever. We get a little desensitized to some of that kind of stuff. But Jordan Hall is legitimately one of the very best players in the entire country. And on the day after signing day, Georgia's added a defensive lineman that you can compared to Jalen Carter for the way that he maybe completed his high school career. You hear Devontae Wyatt kind of thrown around here a little bit. That's a first-round draft pick. Like Jordan Hall is in keeping with some of the very best defensive tackles in the country that have come through Georgia in recent years, that this cannot be obscured. This is a major, major recruiting win here for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to how far Georgia has come. Remember, let's go back, like, say, 3 years before Carter had committed. I think it'd been consistently talked about on your shows how defensive line recruiting, I think, needed to take a step forward. And now, flash forward after, landing and developing a Trayvon Walker, after developing Jordan Davis into a first-round pick, Devontae Wyatt as well. Jalen Carter continues to make strides. You land Bear Alexander and Michael Williams in this previous recruiting class. Now you land Jordan Hall. It's like, all right, this is nice. Whereas like 3-4 years ago, I mean, this would be celebrated as a massive, massive win. Yeah. And now it's just sort of par for the course. They go out, they have a shopping list every year in terms of the players they want to go out and grab. And an impact defensive lineman like Jordan Hall is going to be on just about every team's list in the country. You saw the 4 finalists for Jordan Hall: Alabama, LSU, Florida, and Georgia. All those programs wanted him badly. And for Georgia to go out and get him go into Jacksonville, I think should not be lost, especially when we've heard so much about how Florida needed to have a really big recruiting class. And let's be honest, they just haven't. And missing on a guy like Hall, when you're a first-year coach like Billy Napier, I guess now a second-year coach, that just makes things really, really hard on you, because Hall is absolutely the sort of player you need to land and bring in if you're going to become more competitive in the SEC.
So, Connor, I think one of the things I'm fascinated by are football prospects and their ability to dunk the ball, basketball, and we just saw Jordan Hall dunking a basketball there. Once again, that's a comparison to Jalen Carter. Now, Jalen Carter brought the rim home with him when he would dunk it. So I don't know that anybody's going to be compared necessarily to a Jalen Carter from a dunking the basketball standpoint. But if I'm bringing in a defensive tackle who's getting up over the rim and sending it down right there, you can still see the backboard shaking. If that's the kind of athleticism my new defensive tackle is bringing to the table with him, that in a lot of ways is sort of all I need to know. Because, by the way, who else was a good basketball player? Trayvon Walker was a good basketball player, too. A little bit different profile as a football player, obviously, than Jordan Hall. But the idea of big men, defensive linemen who are so athletic they were also good basketball players, that's been a pretty good recipe in the past year for Georgia.
Yeah, Jalen Carter still has the all-timer with the windmill dunk he threw down, but you bring that up. Trayvon Walker, basketball player. Jordan Davis grew up playing basketball. You have Jalen Carter, obviously his exploits. You have Jordan Hall there showing off what he can do. I would also note there's a video out there. I believe Jeff Santel, our colleague, tweeted this out today. There's a video of Damon Wilson. It's not him dunking a basketball, but it's getting his head above the rim.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredibly impressive, and we hear so much about the importance of multi-star athletes. Jordan Hall, I believe, fits into that category. You have a lot of players that go after that, and it speaks to what this Georgia class has been built on now. 11 top 100 overall prospects in the class, second in the country. Now with Jordan Hall in the mix, this is a stat I dug up last night. In the last 2 signing classes, Georgia has signed 17 defensive players that were top 100 overall prospects in their respective class. The rest of the country has only 2 programs that has signed 16 or more top 100 prospects, Texas A&M and Alabama, over that same span. The fact that Georgia is adding that level of talent to a defense a year after the best defense we've seen in, I think, quite some time in a college football level, as our colleague Jeff tweeted out earlier today, it's not unrealistic, I think, to imagine what that 2024 defense could potentially be like if we see this group take the developmental strides that every Georgia defensive recruiting class has taken.
And then, Michael, if Jeff Santel is ready to join us, you let me know, and we'll bring him in here. And I want to come back on a couple of points with Jordan Hall with you, including one of those that you just mentioned. But I don't want to go too deep into this discussion without mentioning Ra Thomas here because – and I'm clearly a Georgia partisan, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of a fan here. But if the rest of the country is going to start letting Georgia utilize transfer portal and possibly NIL, although I won't speak on the expert in terms of how that might be utilized in a situation like this. But if the rest of the country is going to start letting Georgia utilize the modern mechanisms to stock wide receivers the same way it's stocking players, other positions, including all the defensive success that you just mentioned, then it is literally game over, go home. Because that's the one area in which Georgia, I think we would probably say, doesn't quite feel like Georgia. So many top-flight NFL names coming across the board. I mean, obviously guys like George Pickens would certainly speak to that, but overall, the overall depth at wide receiver has not really been what it's been in other positions. But all of a sudden now you see a guy like Ra Thomas who has shown an ability to put up numbers. He was in excess of 600 yards receiving for Mississippi State here this year. a guy that's shown the ability to put up numbers in SEC play, if this is the kind of way in which Georgia's going to use the transfer portal to populate, some leftover spaces with guys who've proven to be SEC worthy, then I don't know how the rest of the country is going to compete with that.
Right. Wide receiver, I think for the last 2 years now, because of the injuries we've seen at this position group, it's just been hard to get consistency out of this group. Ladd McConkey had an excellent season this year, but then you look at a guy like A.D. Mitchell, who's really sidetracked this entire season. And so if you can go out and get a guy like Ra Thomas, who, he's not quite as big, but reminds me a little bit profile-wise of Lawrence Cager. And we all saw what he was able to do when he came in and was healthy for this Georgia program. And so if you're able to go out and bring a caliber like that, that's already gone through the SEC, that is going to be here in January and be able to go through the program and go through an offseason with this team, along with the fact that Georgia, quite frankly, might not be done in the transfer portal. Yeah. Obviously, Smoke Bowie is still a name to know out there, as well as fellow Missouri wide receiver Dominic Lovett out of Missouri. So this addition, it's not surprising that we saw Georgia go out and grab a player out of the transfer portal. Kirby had sort of made it clear, last year was more circumstantial than anything there. Thomas fits what Georgia is looking for, fills a need at that wide receiver position. And so for them to go out, get one of the best wide receivers in the country, at least that is available in the transfer portal right now, to an offense that next year is going to be really, really good once again. Brock Bowers is back. Ladd McConkey is back. You expect to get a full season at A.D. Mitchell. You feel really good about the development on the offensive line there. I know a lot of people really love what Georgia has in this quarterback room, as Kirby Smart touched on yesterday. The ceiling for this offense is really high next year, and then they go out and they bring in a proven SEC contributor in Ra Thomas to fill some of the void at that wide receiver position.
And here's the thing, and listen, I don't mind telling you this, I obviously wanted Georgia to get Travis Hunter. I really did. I like Hunter as a player, having watched him play in high school, and plus it's just kind of fun to be involved with such a big name. And yet, I'm going to do spin zone here for a moment to say that it's not obvious to me that Hunter would have definitely been a better player at Georgia than Ra Thomas has a chance to be, because we have an amazing proof of concept for him. He has performed in the SEC. We know that he can handle the rigors of this conference. I'm not here to tell you he's going to be the next George Pickens or anything like that. That's not my point in all this. But there is obviously some proof that he can handle. Getting a little bit of feedback there. He can handle what's coming the way of him in the SEC because he's already done it. And so from that standpoint, even though his name carries a little bit less weight than what a Travis Hunter would carry, maybe he's a safer bet for a program like Georgia because what he can do in the SEC because, as I've said, he's already done it.
Right, and I don't want to disparage Travis Hunter in any way here, and I hope I don't with what comes out of my mouth next. Travis Hunter got over 40,000 YouTube subscribers this week. Has clearly, I believe, and again, this isn't a negative, this is just part of who people are. He's made it about himself. He has been part of the spectacle with Jackson State and Deion Sanders these past couple of years. And the reality is, that's just not what the Georgia football program is about. They don't want to have those sorts of players and those sorts of people in this program. It is big team, little me. And from what we've seen from Travis Hunter, that hasn't necessarily flied with who he has been. That's not to say that he can't change that. That's not to say that he can't be a successful football player, because I absolutely believe he will be at Jackson State. But given what we saw just transpire with Arik Gilbert coming in from the transfer portal and the way that whole saga had played out there, I understand, some people maybe being weary of Travis Hunter and taking him, whereas a guy like Ra Thomas has grinded it out of the SEC level already and has shown that, hey, I'm capable of performing in this conference each and every Saturday. And now I believe I can go do that at a place that wins every Saturday and can do that and help this team get better next season.
Let me bring Jeff Sintel in on this. And Jeff, obviously, eventually we're going to get to the Jordan Hall news. That's obviously big on your beat in the recruiting world. But when you look at what we're just talking about here right now with Ra Thomas, I think it's safe to assume that when you take a transfer player on, there are moments in which you're not really quite so sure what you're getting, how that guy transfers into your situation. In fact, I think it's probably fair to say that a couple, or if not certainly a transfer that Georgia's taken in this transfer portal age, when they got that player on campus, maybe he wasn't quite what they thought he was going to be. But with Ra Thomas, it seems hard for me to imagine you'd be surprised by how he translates to your offense and your situation, because he's already played in this league. I've said that now many, many times, and on the list of things that I value about Thomas, it's a statistical profile, having played against SEC opponents. I don't know that he's the most spectacular player in the country, but he's pretty close to a sure thing in terms of what you can expect from him, certainly in terms of his floor, if nothing else. Before we get to the Jordan Hall stuff, jump in on this Ra Thomas conversation, how big of a get this is for the Georgia wide receiver room.
Yeah, my interpretation here is a bunch of rah-rah for Georgia. I'm going to say something here, and it's just kind of how I feel. Everybody has their opinions. I think Travis Hunter could be an NFL Hall of Famer one day at wide receiver. I really do. But I think the better fit for Georgia in the 2023 football season is Ra Thomas. If you look at it, Ra is ready to roll. He's ready to do it in the SEC. He's already done it in the SEC. He's got 12 touchdowns playing outside of the SEC West when he wasn't even a full-time SEC receiver. And let's face it, when the question of Travis Hunter always came up to me, I was like, sure, he'd help Georgia. I think Georgia would have helped him too. But to me, my perception of Georgia football is it's very hard. It's not fun all the time. It's not comfortable to play for Kirby Smart, especially during the fall. Those were all the things that Travis Hunter had with Deion Sanders. And it never seemed to me like that was something, why should he move? Why should he go somewhere? I just really like the pickup here of Ra Thomas. He's got a strong why. In my book of following players for who makes it and who doesn't, guys that have a very strong why always translate to me as, big-time players. He wants to come to Georgia to be developed in a pro-style offense. He wants to go against those game-time, big-time defensive backs and safeties. And he wants to show folks that if he can get it done at Georgia and he can get it done in the SEC, then he's very likely also a first-round, second-round type receiver. Lots of speed, 4.4 guy. Brennan, I've seen some film where somehow in the world somebody threw a dig route into the ground and Ra Thomas still caught it with one hand off his shoe tops. I think he's an immediate upgrade for Georgia's receiver room. They're going to turn it over, man. They're going to bring a lot of youth, and I think this will balance that out. And I'm sure maybe you guys, I just jumped on. Have you already started talking about Dominic Lovett with a 5 p.m. announcement later today? Brandon, I know you like greedy, but this is the last time I can remember the day after early signing day being more of a reporting challenge than the day of signing day.
Well, obviously, Lovett would be a huge get for Georgia. I mean, I'd love to be able to add both of these experienced receivers because I'll just simply re-rack the same opinion that I've given on Thomas, that Lovett's another one of these guys that's sort of proven that he can contribute at the SEC level, so I'd be thrilled about that. And by the way, Missouri had no quarterback situation whatsoever, so that probably even speaks even more to what Lovett has the ability to do. And I'll also point this out. A lot of our audience is very well acquainted with who Ra Thomas is, but for those who are not, obviously he played at Mississippi State, but Ra had made the decision to transfer far before the terrible passing and the sad news involving Mike Leach, that this was not a story impacted by the passing of Leach. For people who may just be only now getting acquainted with Ra Thomas, saying that he played at Mississippi State, his decision to transfer far predated the horrible news as it relates to Leach. So just to make sure that we're clear on that. And then, Jeff, on the Jordan Hall situation, this is a recruit that you follow, that you've written about at DogNation.com. Connor and I were just talking about the sheer magnitude of what this is for Georgia, that you don't want to lose sight of the individual names here, because after a while you maybe get desensitized to some of the numbers, that this is obviously a massive, massive get here for Georgia. You've written more about Hall than obviously I have, but go into more detail here about what he brings to the table.
Well, Brandon, I guess the simplest way I can say it, everybody likes lists and rankings. Well, for me, once Samuel Mpemba chose the Dogs, Big Baby, to me, was the biggest remaining priority target on the board for Georgia. Number 2 was Damon Wilson. I don't think that's a knock on Wilson either. What it was is scarcity, Brandon. If you look at all the bases that were checked in the Georgia defensive line, defensive side of the ball, in this 2023 class, the one area they didn't have enough depth was, I think, on the defensive line. It was only Jamal Jarrett, man. That was it. And now Georgia adds a player. I'm going to say this very, very simply. I think he's the best defensive line guy coming into Georgia outside of Jalen Carter that's been in the Kirby Smart era. I think he's that talented at this stage. Brandon, he has a strong desire to win. His teams, I think, won 4 combined games his last 2 seasons. Big Baby has a strong why. He wants to win. And he had a very dapper suit today. I don't know if you saw it, that sport jacket, that coat he had on the day of his announcement. He was looking pretty good today.
He was indeed. And Connor, you brought this up a little bit earlier. To me, I don't think you can lose sight here of it is more success for Georgia in the state of Florida. And I was looking at this the other day. I guess as it stands right now, we don't yet know what Cormani McClain is going to do. He did not sign with Miami on Wednesday as was expected to. But the last time I checked, Florida didn't hold a single commit from any of the top 20 rated players in the state of Florida, and Georgia obviously has held on to a few of those. Now, some of those are IMG guys, which maybe, technically, they're not Floridians, but nonetheless, it's right down the road from Gainesville from a recruiting standpoint, and yet they haven't been able to take advantage of that. To see that Georgia continues to have this success in Florida, while Florida is not having anywhere near the same level of success in their own state, that's pretty eye-opening. Now, the backdrop of this is Georgia hasn't exactly cleaned house in its state either, but certainly the overall recruiting class isn't hurting by this. I just think with Florida trying to reboot itself with a brand new coach, what they are not doing in their own state in comparison to Georgia, Connor, I believe that has to be part of the story.
I think it is. And this is a Georgia. Yeah, sure. You can mention the IMG guys, Sam Mpemba, who's originally from Missouri, and Gabe Harris, who's originally from Thomasville, Georgia. But at the same point in time there, you've also got, Damon Wilson out of the Florida area. Jalen Carter is a long-term answer there. Georgia has shown consistently throughout its time under Kirby Smart, they're able to go in and win big-time recruits out of Florida. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint is a name that comes to mind there. So, that Jordan Hall is the latest to do this is not that surprising. But the fact that Florida couldn't really make any major inroads when it comes to getting guys at the top of this class, at the top of the Florida class, rather, because I think Florida and Texas are 1 and 2 in terms of talent produced on a yearly basis. Georgia is now solidly number 3 there. But this was a down year for Georgia in the state of Georgia. Only 5 top 100 players overall in the state. Obviously, number 1 and 2, 5-star players, Caleb Downs and Justin Haynes, end up going to Alabama. But when you're able to go in and get a guy like a Damon Wilson, a Jordan Hall now there as well, when you're able to add quality players like a Raylan Wilson, who I quite frankly think is underranked and in my opinion is one of the best 32 players in the 2023 recruiting class this year, when you're able to go into all parts of Florida and win like that, it says a lot about how you are as a recruiting staff and what you're able to do. And the fact that Billy Napier, yes, they have some good players. It's a fringe top 10 recruiting class, I guess, in terms of raw blue chip percentage. It is higher than what Dan Mullen has done. But Billy Napier wasn't brought in to sign number 10, 11, 12 ranked recruiting classes. He was brought in there to bring in top 5 recruiting classes. And I can comfortably say that is not what he has done in year 1 with a full recruiting slate. And missing out on guys like Jordan Hall is only going to make that harder going forward.
So, Jeff, I want to touch on something that you also brought up here a moment ago, too. I guess Dominic Lovett hinting on Instagram about something happening at 5 p.m. today. Are you expecting that to be Dominic Lovett, the former Missouri wide receiver? Are you expecting that to be his transfer destination coming up later on this evening?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to drop a top 5. I don't think Dominic's going to be about that. I think that's another decision. I mean, look, it sounds like Kirby Smart's given Dog Nation all of its Christmas presents a little bit early. You see that they've got 2 big booms today already. They could have potentially 3 big booms as well. And what they're doing, man, is just continuing to assemble a roster that is the envy of a lot of programs, right? And I think one of the things that, I always try to stress perspective in a lot of walks of life, including reporting, including what we do. And, Brandon, it wasn't too long ago that Georgia fans would have been numb to days like this or days like yesterday where so much talent comes in. I mean, Jordan Big Baby Hall, I believe, is the number 73 player in the country on the composite. I think he's 65 on the On3 consensus rankings. And I think Georgia has about 7 or 8 guys higher rated than him. I really like Hall's future in this class. Now he's a 2-way player. I love the Big Baby nickname. But what they've done right now with assembling talent, assembling players, especially ready-to-go players, we can all assume this. Georgia and Kirby Smart had a conversation with every player in the last month of the season, knew what their thoughts were, knew what they were going to do. And these roster moves you see right now during this frenzied time, to me, looks like Georgia reassembling its team for next year.
So let's do something really irresponsible, Connor, because this is beyond way too early. Who gets your preseason number 1 for next year? Is there obviously we don't know who starting quarterback is going to be for half these teams, but who gets your preseason number 1 for 2023?
Georgia, because Alabama's going to have a new quarterback. Ohio State's going to have a new quarterback. Yes, Georgia is going to have a new quarterback as well. Maybe Michigan, if they do win it all this season and then J.J. McCarthy comes back next year, maybe you see a path forward for them. Now, I don't believe there's talented in terms of the raw roster that they have there.
And they may lose Harbaugh, by the way.
Yeah, there have been a lot of rumors around the Indianapolis Colts potentially hiring him as well there. And that should not go unnoticed. Second straight year that an NFL team has looked at Jim Harbaugh potentially as a head coaching replacement. So I mean, look, it's hard to sit here on December 22nd and not say, obviously Georgia wants to take care of business here first and finish out the season. And look, they're going to lose some really great players. Jalen Carter, Keely Ringo, Broderick Jones, I think are all going to be first-round picks, and those are all third-year players there as well. They're going to lose some really talented guys, but Brock Bowers is still coming back next year. I think this defense is going to be even better next season as Malachi Starks, Michael Williams, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Shmuel Munden, Kamari Lassiter. Tell me when you wanted me to stop naming guys that are going to be back and I think get better over the course of this offseason. You get another year of Lad McConkey, who was really, really turned from a guy who was at first a nice story into a legit player into what I think next year, if he does what he does in a greater sample this year, one of the best receivers and best weapons in the SEC. When you bring all that back, along with just the institutional knowledge that Georgia has, and we know they're going to get better over the course of the season, also against a pretty weak schedule next season, it's hard not to see Georgia starting. It's hard not to see Georgia starting the season as the number one team in the country next year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think there's a strong case to be made for anybody but Georgia here right now. And obviously the potential transfer target additions only kind of bolster that case. Jeff, also go back to the Jordan Hall thing here for a moment. Like the one thing that kind of goes through my mind here is that obviously we're in a day and age in which offense really is kind of king across college football, and it's hard to be a defensive-led team. But I think the unspoken context of that is it's hard to be a defensive-led team unless you have the kind of defense that Georgia had in 2021. And I don't think it's any stretch of the imagination to say that at that level, Georgia could field that again in some future year. That's really what the last two cycles have been about. An unprecedented collection of defensive backs for the class of 2022. Unprecedented collection of inside and outside linebackers here for the class of 2023, bringing in defensive tackles like Jamal Jarrett and now Jordan Hall that very much look like what defensive linemen on the Georgia 2021 roster could have looked like here, is that Georgia is building defensively the kind of thing that very easily could even surpass what it had in 2021. And I say that knowing full well how I guess aggressive of a claim that is, but the proof could very much be in the pudding based on the kinds of players that Georgia's brought in.
Yeah, Brandon, you never struck me as a hot take guy. I try not to be a hot take guy. I just look at it as fact. I look at the collection of players that Georgia has brought in over the past two cycles, especially defensively, and they, by and large, are a better all-around group than the ones that assembled that 2021 defense. They just are. I mean, think about what Georgia's added in the last two cycles alone. Michael Williams. They've added Christian Miller. They've added Big Bear Alexander. They've added Darius Smith. They've added Marvin Jones Jr. Now they got Samuel Mpemba. They got Damon Wilson. They got Jordan Big Baby Hall. They got Jamal Jarrett. I mean, it just keeps stacking up, man. Gabe Harris Jr. The one thing Georgia did when they got their guys is all their defensive guys, Brandon, they were not slouches. They were guys all rated within the top 200 players in the country. I thought Connor had a great stat in his copy earlier today, where he said that the number of defensive players Georgia has taken out of the past two cycles is now up to 17, I believe, Connor, with the addition of Big Baby Hall. And Brandon, wait for it. There's only two programs that have taken that many players total in the past two seasons inside the nation's top 100. That's A&M and that's Alabama. But that's just the defensive side of the ball there for Georgia. I think Kirby Smart said yesterday that the national championship didn't weigh too heavily on this 2023 recruiting class. I'll tell you what did. I think that NFL draft certainly did when you add in all that winning.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So let me do a couple of final things here, and I'll open the floor up to both of you guys. So some news coming in, and this was kind of expected. Tony Grimes is leaving North Carolina. It sounds like he's going to Texas A&M. Jeff, very short question, very short answer. Do you think reclassifying hurt him as a player? Because
Tony Grimes?
Yeah,
I think so. I think I'll tell you this, and I would say if that was a normal recruiting year, I think he would have been a Georgia Bulldog.
Yeah, because I mean, you haven't heard a peep about him since he reclassified, and I can't help but wonder that. And then Jaden Daniels has announced he's coming back to LSU. And if you're an LSU fan, Connor, are you satisfied with Jaden Daniels as your quarterback next year?
I think so. He did lead you to a win over Alabama. His versatility, I think, and his ability to run is a big thing there. And he's got to find a way to stay healthy over the course of the season. That's really difficult to do at an SEC level. But when you go and get wins against LSU, wins against Ole Miss, wins against Arkansas, I do think that shows you're a bona fide SEC level player and a guy who, he can make improvements year two, not coming in as a transfer this time around. I think he can get better there. I know a lot of people were really impressed with what Garrett Nussmeier did in the second half of that SEC championship game. But Jaden Daniels, let's not forget, is the guy that got them there. And I would say he played, given the circumstances that he was playing under, dealing with a bum ankle, I actually thought he played pretty impressively in that first half against Georgia. Obviously, didn't lead to a whole lot of points there, but I thought he did a good job moving the ball consistently in that game. And I think if he can get better this offseason for them, I think we're going to see Georgia and LSU in the SEC championship game again next year.
Wow, that's a strong take. That was worth waiting for right there. That's really fun. How about a final thought, Connor? Actually, let me do this in the form of a question, then you can sort of say whatever you want to. Is there anything else that sort of happened today? Because I've been kind of in and out since Dog Nation Daily ended. Anything else from a national standpoint that we need to make the audience aware of here? And if not, then how about kind of a final thought on what we know now about Ra and Jordan Hall?
I believe we're waiting on Desmond Ricks to announce his announcement. 5-star cornerback. It sounds like LSU is the leader there for his services. Alabama battling Florida there as well. But if I had to guess, I would say LSU is likely to land Ricks there. And look, the SEC and the way that this recruiting cycle has gone, there was a lot of attention. Tennessee, what are they going to do after this strong season? What is Florida going to do year one? Billy Napier. At the end of it, with all this talk of NIL, Oregon going out and getting big players, it sounds like Peyton Bowen, the 5-star safety, is actually going to end up at Oklahoma instead of Oregon. All this talk about NIL, transfer portal, all that, it ends up with Alabama 1, Georgia 2, like it usually does in most years. And I know Georgia fans might not love that they're number 2 in recruiting right now. I can tell you this, Kirby Smart feels very strongly about this recruiting class, and they are absolutely going to be a dominant force in years to come.
No, I think that's exactly right. This was, I think, a real statement class for Georgia. They're not going to be moved by any of the newfangled ideas that exist in college football. That's not enough to move Georgia off the perch that it's established, because while they may be number 2 in recruiting, they are number 1 on the field, and Alabama's watching them on TV. Jeff, how about a final thought from you as far as the Hall stuff, the Ra Thomas, and frankly how the transfer portal is kind of encroaching in on the thing we sort of think of as high school early signing day?
Brandon, did you see the tweet, I guess, of Dan Lanning with "It's a Good Day" by Ice Cube playing in the background and him smoking a stogie at the end of the day yesterday?
Yeah, very nice.
I think Dog Nation needs to do that, Brandon. I think this recruiting class, maybe not heard them. I think it's worthy of at least 3 Brandon Chortles from what we've seen so far. I want to say this. Connor got my mind thinking when he was talking about next year's team. Think about this for a second. Think about what Georgia did last year with a hobbling A.D. Mitchell. There went a lot of firepower at receiver, with no Kendall Milton and with Jalen Carter out for successive weeks in the meat of the season. Yes, the schedule is weak sauce, but think about the new Georgia quarterback. The odds-on favorite is Carson Beck. He's likely to have a receiver pool that's probably as deep as anything in the Kirby Smart era. I mean, you could probably go back to George Pickens year 1, or maybe that year when they had Burton and they had Blaylock and they had all those guys in their first year. But these would be veteran difference makers as well, with Ra, with these speedsters coming in this freshman class. It seems like the offensive firepower and that new quarterback is going to have a little bit more help in 2023. And folks, let me just say it clearly. You folks need to be salivating about this group and this class. I know we're not just trying to be a circus barker and just pump things up because we're in the now and this is the moment. This is a really special class, and I think the addition of some veteran SEC-proven receivers is going to do a lot for next year's team on the field.
Jason M. on YouTube also asked this, Jeff. What did we ever hear about Raymond Cottrell and our friend from Brunswick, Mr. Merriweather? What did we ever hear on that front?
Yeah, so I think I've got a good idea about what's going on with Cottrell, but I don't know if I'll put that into the universe just yet. If somebody wants to say that they're looking at he might be looking at what all's going on with Georgia receivers. That might be a plausible guess. I don't know if that's totally it, but Merriweather pretty much is I got some good reporting on that last night. We talked about that on Hedges. Merriweather had signed with Georgia yesterday. It has been relayed to me that it is a compliance issue.
Okay.
He has not been officially accepted into Georgia yet. I believe it's waiting on an ACT score. He did not need to have his ACT score for Central Florida. You guys remember the Jamal Merriweather story? That was a guy that got flipped late by the Dogs to play offensive tackle, and with good reason.
Yeah, so basically what
The other thing I would just
go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry. Do we lose him?
no.
Okay, you still
Go
there.
ahead.
No. We lost you for a second. You cut out on us. Now you're back in there. So finish your point. Sorry. Pardon me.
So Jamal Merriweather did sign with Georgia. It was a compliance issue. Hadn't taken the ACT yet. Hadn't been accepted by Georgia. He did sign with Georgia. I would expect those papers to be published, so to speak, in Georgia to make him official like tissue when he gets his ACT score in. I thought he had a great senior year. It's not a question of him being worthy of the class, not at all. I think Georgia's going to find a gem in Jamal Merriweather. One other recruiting thing, I thought Connor was right to point out the elements that he did. Brandon, there's also, I don't know if you've noticed this, there's some smoke here about Cormani McClain, the number one cornerback in the country, and Colorado.
I'd heard that.
Not just Miami, not just Florida, not just, bidding and everything else like that. When Deion said he's bringing his luggage with him and he said it was Louis, well, the number one corner in the country would certainly adhere to that. That's a story to kind of watch for and look at right there as this class kind of chugs forward. Now, Brandon, I'm going to take an over-under. You're going to say the name Deuce Robinson about 32 times on 17 shows between now and February the 1st, actually, for the traditional signing day.
And I'll say this, Connor, the other thing that kind of comes up from Jeff there is when it comes to Cormani McClain, we may have a lot of these examples in the future of, hey, if a recruiting battle turns weird, far better to go out to Boulder, Colorado, a million miles from here and play for Deion and go 6-6 in the Pac-12 than to end up at Alabama, which McClain could have very much ended up at, or possibly even still Florida, because I sort of get the impression that Cormani actually kind of liked the Gators. But one way or another, much better. Go out there and play, in the Four Corners area of the country out there in the Pac-12, Colorado, somewhere like that, as opposed to going to Bama or Florida or one of these schools that hits a little closer to home, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know how long Deion is going to be at Colorado, but hey, look, if Travis Hunter's going there instead of Alabama or Florida, if Cormani McClain is going there instead of Alabama or Florida, Ohio State, I think you take that for right now. Now, eventually, if Deion gets an SEC job and Texas A&M, Texas, maybe Florida potentially if things don't go well for Billy Napier, maybe then be careful what you wish for. But right now, Deion out in Boulder, it's not the end of the world if you're Georgia.
And Jeff, I'll say this, and at this point in time, we just got to get off the air because now we've well lost the plot by now. But it wasn't a huge day for Deion yesterday. I mean, you get Travis Hunter, that's a big deal, but you'd already won with Travis Hunter one time before, so it's not like that was some huge shock. And McClain would obviously be a very big get, but beyond that, it's not like Deion made a ton of noise in his first signing day. Now, he just got the job and he coached a game this past weekend, so there were some mitigating factors here. But the Louis Vuitton-style luggage of player acquisition did not exactly show up on early signing day for the Colorado Buffaloes. Can't help but notice.
I think the thing, Brennan, is he just needs some momentum in a couple of recruiting weekends. I think he just had one right before early signing day. I think he got Bo Hughley out there. I know he got Bo Hughley out there for a visit as well. I'll tell you one thing. Maybe I'm a little too bold by watching all this talent stack up, Brandon. It's coming a point where it doesn't matter where these players go. I think Georgia's going to be formidable and Georgia's going to be pretty impressive regardless. And the one thing about Cormani McClain, saw him live, saw him in person. I've seen Travis Hunter about 19 times. Those guys better get some biscuits out in Colorado because they need to put on a little bit of weight. I think both of those guys are well under 180 pounds if they're heading to go play big-time college football. So those guys are going to have to need some strength and conditioning to really make a huge difference in this Saturday game, at least long-term wise.
By the way, if you're a gambling-oriented person, I think it's the Win already has season win totals posted for next year. Colorado's sitting at 5.5 right now for Deion Sanders in his first year after just winning a single game here in 2022. So do with that whatever you will. So good stuff on all of this here today. Jeff, love that on Jordan Hall. Ra Thomas being in the mix there as well. Connor, great from all of you there too. Who knows? Maybe we'll meet back together at some point in time. Again, especially if there's good news on the transfer portal front all over again. But for now, let me thank Kroger for making this such a fun show to come out here and do. Our recruiting coverage all year long has been brought to you by our friends at Kroger, and you better believe down the stretch that's going to be true once again there as well. In fact, they are the source you need for all of your holiday get-together needs and the stuff that makes it so much fun this time of year, the decorations, the last-minute gifts, certainly the food. Can't forget the food. Goodness knows we're all about the food. Well, you get all of that with our friends at Kroger. In fact, you can go online, Kroger.com, Kroger.com/holiday and see all of the great options that are available. That's Kroger.com/holiday. Or you can just sort of stop by and shop in store. You got big savings, up to 30% off in some cases. You got, buy one, get one on some delicious candies there too. So you got some great ways to save some really big bucks and some really fun stuff. So check that out at your local Kroger. For Connor Riley and Jeff Sintel, thank you so much for being a part of this signing day special presented by Kroger. Happy holidays. Maybe we'll talk to you again soon. We'll see how that goes. But for now, thanks for being a part of this, and we'll look forward to seeing you then.